Continue with the file reading of the Donald Canestarro file. This is the interview of Richard Clarke. Later in September of 2016, I interviewed Mr. Richard Clarke. Mr. Clarke is a former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Clinton and President George W. Bush. Mr. Clarke recalled that in the role within the National Security Council, he was to coordinate all intelligence related to terrorism to facilitate the sharing of information between law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And this wasn't so much of an issue under the Clinton administration, but under the George Bush administration, DCI George Tenet basically tried to become closer friends to George Bush than Clarke was. And because Clarke was a leftover of the Clinton administration, in which he was the only one, he wasn't viewed very approvingly. And so Tenet, being the bureaucrat that he is, basically cozied up to Bush because he knew that the individuals under Bush and his cabinet worked under the national security agencies. People like the Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld, Joint Chiefs of Staff Richard Myers, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. These are people that are sworn loyal to Bush, and they even had like a nickname for them called the Vulcans. Mr. Clarke stated that sometime before the 9/11 attacks, he was told by Deputy CIA Director Christopher Black that the CIA did not have any human intelligence sources inside Al-Qaeda. Mr. Clarke recalled that Black told him he was resolved to address the situation and penetrate Al-Qaeda with informants. In fact, in 1999, Tenet tasked Christopher Black with an operation called the Plan regarding getting informants inside Al-Qaeda as intelligence sources. But this goes to show you, with people like Christopher Black or James Pavitt, the director of operations, or George Tenet, they didn't have experience in this field because they relied on the analysts instead of the field officers. And this is the reason why bureaucrats were not seen favorably by the field officers at the CIA. And, under George Tenet, he did a lot of house cleaning. A lot of the people that were let go or forced into retirement were field officers. One of them being Gary Schroen. Gary Schroen was the original director of the Operation Jawbreaker, and he was replaced by Gary Bernstein. Mr. Clarke stated he was never informed that the CIA had learned that al-Hazmi al-Midar attended a high-level al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia in 2000, in which the NSA knew about that too. It was the NSA who knew about it first, then the CIA, because the CIA had a man inside the NSA Malaysia operation. And they told, by then, the CIA knew about it because Michael Shorey, who was the station chief at the Bin Laden issue station at the time, went and complained to the NSA. I think this is one of the reasons why he got pushed out and replaced by Richard Blee, who was more of a company man. Mr. Clarke stated that he later learned that approximately 50 people within the CIA knew about al-Hazmi al-Midar attended a Malaysian meeting with other members of al-Qaeda. And what does that tell you? Right? 50 people within the counterterrorism center, within the Bin Laden issue station. What are we talking about? We're talking about case officers or analysts. Analysts. Case officers are in the field. They don't know what's going on. Analysts. People like Alfredo Ambikowski, Michelle Ann Casey, Tom Wilshire. Upper people, James Pavitt. Christopher Black, it's got to be George Tenet. No. Because he ultimately makes a decision on whether the information is shared and whatnot. And because, Tenet lied at the 9/11 Commission and the Joint House Inquiry. Straight up lie. Mr. Clarke stated that if he had given this information, he would have passed it to John O'Neill at the FBI field office for further investigation. And that wasn't the only problem. Was that if the FBI had found out the CIA was running an illegal operation with Saudi intelligence inside the United States regarding the monitoring of al-Qaeda subjects, heads were going to roll. And that's the end of George Tenet. Out. Probably Director of Operations, James Pavitt, out. Mr. Clarke stated it was common knowledge between the staff at the National Security Council that he had a close relationship with Special Agent John O'Neill, and that any information gathered by another agency of interest to the New York Field Division would have immediately be passed by Clarke to O'Neill and the counterterrorism squad. And, they would have arrested Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi as soon as they got off that plane at LAX on January 8, 2000. Not January 15, 2000. 9/11 would have happened. That's not to say the CIA knew about 9/11. Just saying that information shared with the FBI, with local law enforcement, would have prevented 9/11 had they didn't have to know about it. But the CIA was running an illegal operation. There's a reason why they withheld this information. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, hey, the CIA knew about 9/11 operation. There's no evidence to suggest this. Mr. Clarke told me that he routinely passed CIA information to the FBI, that passing intelligence information between agencies was part of a day-to-day duties at the NSA. Maybe that's the reason why Richard Clarke was not detailed with everything. Now, remember, he meets with George Tenet, DCI. DCI answers to him. Mr. Clarke told me that the policy of the FBI during 2000 was that as soon as a terror suspect was identified, the suspect would be promptly arrested by FBI agents. Mr. Clarke stated that the top FBI official in the counterterrorism division, Dale Watson, was also not informed that the CIA knew about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar and that they attended the al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia. Mr. Clarke stated that he believed that the reason why the FBI was not informed about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar and that he had attended the al-Qaeda meeting, that the two hijackers had multiple entry visas to the United States, was that the CIA was running a false flag operation to recruit the hijackers. According to Mr. Clarke, this false flag operation would have involved Omar al-Bayoumi, befriending the two hijackers by attempting to convince them that he was sympathetic to their cause. At the same time, al-Bayoumi would have been reporting on the hijackers' activities to, make myself disappear, Saudi intelligence and ultimately to the CIA. Mr. Clarke stated that when he proclaimed this belief publicly, he received an angry call from former director of the CIA, George Tenet. Mr. Clarke noted that, however, Mr. Tenet did not deny the allegations made by Mr. Clarke. What was he going to do? Go to the police? Right. That's because Tenet was telling Clarke, hey, listen, shut up, idiot. You're going to get us in trouble. I got to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which he did a couple of years later after the 9/11 attacks. George Tenet is the traitor, along with Tom Wilshire and Cofer Black, and Alfredo Bukowski and Michelle Lane Casey. Mr. Clarke stated that the 9/11 Commission did not investigate the Saudi connection to the 9/11 attacks completely. And that's because the Department of Justice was getting pressure from the Bush administration, predictably so, because they got to protect their Saudi interests. Mr. Clarke recalled that the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow, was selected by the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, to prevent damage to the Bush administration by blocking the Commission's line of inquiry to the Saudi connection. Mr. Clarke told me that the operation to penetrate al-Qaeda may have been organized by high-level employees at the CIA. Mr. Clarke stated he believed that most of the records of the CIA's operation to penetrate al-Qaeda, though, through al-Bayoumi, was destroyed in an effort to cover up the operation. Well, we have Operation Encore, which damn well shows that the Saudis were involved with collecting intelligence on Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Hani Andrew. Who knows about the Muslim hijackers? Mr. Clarke stated he was first informed that the CIA had known about al-Hazmi al-Mihdhar's involvement with al-Qaeda during the late morning hours of the 9/11 attacks. Mr. Clarke stated while he was on a secure video conference receiving an update on the attacks, he was interrupted by a call from Dale Watson, the assistant director of the FBI for counterterrorism. Watson told Mr. Clarke that he wanted to pass some important information. Mr. Clarke stated he stepped outside the conference room into the hallway to take Watson's call. During the call, Watson told Mr. Clarke that the passenger manifests had been checked for the planes that had been involved in the attacks. Watson further told Clarke that the names al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar were previously identified as being members of al-Qaeda and that the FBI was recently told of this by the CIA. That's why the Canestarro document's the biggest revelation in all of 9/11 history regarding information intelligence. These are coming from the highest level sources. Since Mr. Clarke already gave public testimony at the 9/11 Commission, Joint House Inquiry, the 9/11 Commission, his name is publicly mentioned. And so I mean, how many times do I got to say? CIA, Saudi intelligence, working side by side and collecting information on Al Qaeda terrorists inside the United States, which is highly illegal according to the law. But Joint House Inquiry, 9/11 Commission, didn't hold the CIA's feet to the fire like they should have. I mean, there was some criticism. I mean, one of them being Carl Levin of the Joint House Inquiry was the only one who basically really put Tennant and Black and Wilshire uh, to the test. The only one. That's why I made a podcast episode based on that. All right, guys. Look, thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you very much for taking an interest in this very important topic that affects us all still today. It's the reason why I'm still making daily videos, because unlike any other event in history, 9/11 changed the course of the world, and everything that's happening right now is because of the ripple effect of 9/11. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend. See you in the next video.